Whistle, Tales from Azeroth. As always here at the Pig and Whistle Inn in Stormwind, I go through a variety of subjects with regards to World of Warcraft. So grab a bottle or a pint, sit back and enjoy. This midweek episode will be going over Rate My Dungeon. I completely forgot the name. I thought I was doing the other one for some reason. I don't know, my brain had a little bit of a meltdown there. We're going to be going over Rate My Dungeon, and we're going to be doing... This will be the penultimate... Yes, that is the word. Yes, penultimate episode for this series for Burning Crusade dungeons. After this, we'll be moving into Wrath of the Lich King dungeons, and then we'll carry on from there. Depending on how well the episodes are received, we can go on to other things. But that's a long time in the future. We have Arcatraz and Botanica today. These are two dungeons that are located both in Netherstorm. You do need flying mounts to get to these dungeons, so already it's a negative if you didn't acquire much gold or are very poor at farming gold, essentially. But if you're a druid, it's a positive because flight form at level 68, you know, one of them things. Although you still did have to pay for the training, I believe. It's... one of these is good, one of these is bad, in my opinion. If you can guess which one the bad one is, I guess it's not too difficult to know which one the bad one is, but you'll know the pain that you have to go through for that one. So, Arcatraz, 4 bosses, both on heroic and normal. It's a very simple design, it's very linear. There isn't much to it apart from... Well, actually, there's probably nothing to it. You can probably skip a couple mobs, but that's about it. Nothing too scary. But the loot in there is decent. The only problem with this dungeon is that it's a requirement for certain things. You need to do this dungeon for a quest. And this quest, or actually a couple quests you need to do this for. So you had to go back and forth, because they're not all the same. Like, you don't pick up the quest at the same time. You pick them up at different intervals within this quest chain. And that means that it is very annoying to deal with because you're having to go back and forth. This, along with, basically the mechanics of the instance, makes it very, very annoying. So, there are a lot of mobs in this instance that are mechanically super annoying, especially when people aren't necessarily as up to it, we'll say. There are lots... I don't know how to put it. They're not quite there. Like, if people are just mindlessly AFKing, sometimes you can wipe. So there's these mobs that when you hit them... they essentially, the first hit that they do, they reduce that type of damage. So if you frost shock them, they'll take 75% frost damage. So if you do this as a group of frost mages, you'll be killing them very slowly. In the same room, there is a mob that puts a well underneath itself, like a void well. If you do not move this mob out of it, it will heal and deal more damage. And tanks were notorious for not understanding, oh, they're not dying, it must be a DPS's fault. No, it's your fault. Move them out of this well and we can kill them and you won't die. It's very simple. But ultimately, in this dungeon, people did just get hit really hard. The mobs did hit very, very hard in this instance on heroic. And having to be forced to go into here was kind of the reason why it wasn't necessarily enjoyed by a lot of the players. Especially the last room where there's infernals, there's hunters and stuff. All of them hit really hard, but the infernals can do a meteor that people had to stack. People didn't understand this, so they were just separated and get one shot by a meteor, and then it's like, oh, what the hell, healer? And it's like, dude, you got one shot. Like, that's not our fault. That's your fault for standing, like, away from everyone else because it's split damage. You know, it was a pain in the arse sort of dungeon, just because of the trash packs that were in the dungeon itself. Botanica, on the other hand, was a 5-player heroic and normal dungeon. It wasn't as bad in terms of the mobs. There was a lot of satyr mobs. There was a lot of mobs that had stuff that you could dispel. But ultimately, all they did was kind of put death and decay on the floor towards the end. And not much more. There wasn't much more. There were a lot of mobs that just simply melee attacked, like in the middle of it. The end and the beginning and the end of the dungeon were the tougher parts with mobs, but essentially throughout the entire middle part, you've got mobs that are just melee hitting, and you could essentially AoE farm them. This was very good for loot, actually. This gave a lot of paladin tank gear. This gave a lot of like tier sets that were very, very good. Arcatraz, I don't think did that as much. I think it might have one or two good pieces, but the dungeon itself was just too annoying in order to get these pieces, in my opinion. You had to be a bit more geared to go into Arcatraz, I would say. Botanica also gave way to people herbing. There's a lot of like herbs in this dungeon, so you could passively gain more gold in this dungeon just by running through it as the only herbalist than if you were to do Arcatraz a few times, because the Botanica dungeon had herbs such as I've forgotten the name of them. It's not netherweave. You know, the nether one, the nether herb or whatever. I forget the name of it. You also have like terracones in there, stuff like that sold really well on the auction house. So money-wise, it was very fun and enjoyable to go into Botanica as a herbalist. You were actually looking forward to it. So these two have completely different types of, like, they're in the exact same place, but they're the exact same dungeon, kind of. It's just they've put different types of mobs in here, and that's what's made it. That, and you are forced to go into one when you're not forced to go into the other one. So I think by Blizzard sending people into a dungeon that they have to do constantly, or for a quest chain to get into a raid and stuff like that, makes it a bit more annoying than, yeah, I can do some Botanica. Like, you're not forced to, it's of your own choice, you have no reason to be here, you're just doing it for the fun, the loot, the herbing. But Arcatraz is like, okay, I have to do this, and it feels like a job almost, and you're sent in there to go and talk to a prisoner, or to free Millhouse, or to kill the final boss, that kind of thing, and it's like, ugh, I just can't be arsed with this. This dungeon is annoying enough, let alone having to do a quest for it like a few times, that kind of thing. So one of them gets a 5 out of 10, and one of them gets a 7. I think you can guess which, Arcatraz being the 5, Botanica being the 7, and that's purely on the basis that you are forced to do one compared to you not being forced to do one, which is really strange, but it's also because of the mobs in there. The mobs in there do make it, and I had a lot of fun farming Botanica, because I would go in a guild group and would do massive pulls. If we died, we died, who cares, we're having fun. If we went into Arcatraz, it would be very slow and gritty, and you would want to get out of there as quickly as possible, because you can't do big pulls, you can't do anything. It's always, every mob is quite a scary mob in there, so you have to pull it one by one, and that's a very boring gameplay in my opinion. So yeah, it only gets a 5 out of 10 for me, Arcatraz, but Botanica gets a decent 7 out of 10. It might even be 8, to be honest, because it's actually quite a fun dungeon. But that is it for this episode. Thank you all very much for listening, as always. Do check out the Patreon down below, as well as Twitch and YouTube. Constant stuff happening over there. Thank you all very much for listening, and go with Valor, friend. Goodbye all.